Have you ever imagined playing against pawn to e4 and actually know what you were doing? New starters to chess will face this move on many occasions, unless your opponent bores you to death with a London system. But why do most new players play e4? Well, it's mainly because 99.99% of games at your level will be over in 4 moves from a scholar's mate, and they will try it over and over and over and over. But if you're a bit better than these clowns and have at least 2 brain cells to rub together, you should be able to navigate away from these awful attacks, and there may be some hope for your chess skills. With all that being said, what should you play against this aggressive pawn move? Will you simply copy them and navigate the murky waters of a classical Spanish game, or a chilling Frankenstein Dracula variation? Yes, this is actually an opening. Perhaps you'll go for a quiet French defence, having prepared a ton of attacking ideas with the help of the Ginger Maestro himself, only to see your opponent play an exchange French variation, knocking you unconscious from boredom and leave you questioning your life choices. Or maybe you'll opt to play the Sicilian, where they have cool names like the Dragon or the Yugoslav Attack. You think if you learn one of these niche lines you'll become a super GM, only to realise you're still absolute trash, and the theory of these lines is longer than an encyclopedia of ancient history. Like ancient history though, your fear of e4 is a thing of the past because help is at hand.
Stop it. Get some help.
Much like your heart, Iceland is a cold, barren land that is unforgiving and is the death place of a few famous chess players. For this reason, we're going to lay waste to your opponents with the Icelandic Gambits and conquer e4. After they play pawn to e4, we'll play the Scandinavian defence with pawn to d5. The Scandi is a popular choice by lots of high-end, talented players, and now you. Once they capture, we'll play knight to f6. Hitting the pawn twice, we're in no rush to recapture. We're trying to entice them into playing pawn c4 so we can unleash our Icelandic Gambit. Once c4 has been played, it's time to play pawn to e6 and have a right good laugh. Maybe you could smile menacingly at your opponent whilst you play this move. It might freak them out, causing them to resign, or possibly cause you to be thrown out of the chess tournament for being a complete creep. Either way, you'll save some time. Once e6 is on the white, white has a few moves they can play. First, let's go through queen to a4 check. If they played this move, you can relax and calmly play bishop to d7, safe in the knowledge that your opponent has an IQ of 11. They'll probably move their queen to b3, but now we take on d5, they'll recapture, and knight to a6 is now slightly better for black. If queen takes b7, congratulations, your opponent is an even bigger idiot than you suspected. After knight c5, their queen is trapped, because after queen b4, there's knight d3. Check, with a discovered attack and one of the easiest games you'll ever have. A more popular move is pawn to d4 here. Your opponent thinks they're safety numbers in the centre of the board, like a virus, but much like a good dollop of antibacterial hand gel in the form of a pawn takes d5, will wipe them out. If they play pawn takes d5 back, this is utterly awful. You could get up from the board in disgust if you really wanted to, but best is to simply recapture with knight takes d5, develop your bishop to b4 with a check, and eventually overwhelm the isolated d4 pawn once you get your pieces out. Instead, white should play knight to c3. We'll pin it with bishop to b4, they'll move their knight to f3, and we'll castle. This is pretty easy to understand, so don't mess it up. They'll play bishop to e2, and now once they've moved their bishop, we can take on c4 to waste their move. They'll recapture, and we develop with our bishop to g4. Once they castle, play knight c6. If they're a decent player, they'll develop their bishop somewhere, and we can play queen to d6 with a very even game, but safe in the knowledge a young Magnus Carlsen has tested this position when he was a small child. If he can win this as a child, then surely you can. Now back to e6 and white accepting the gambit. If they take on e6, we'll develop quickly with bishop takes e6. Again, white now has a few moves here. The most common and weakest is pawn to d4. We have an easy follow-up with bishop to b4 check. Once the bishop comes to d2, we'll play a very sneaky queen to e7, protecting and setting up a discovery at the same time. What a genius you are. White can take on b4 and we'll recapture with queen takes b4 check. If queen d2 to block, we'll carry on with super speedy development and knight to c6. It looks like we've blundered here. Can't white just play d5? Well, now sit back and laugh whilst you castle queenside. The pawn is pinned. Sure, white can trade queens, but after we capture with the knight, we're threatening knight c2 check. They have to play knight to a3, and we simply sidestep with bishop to f5. Once they play knight f3, We're steamlining white with rook h to e8 check. Bishop e2 is losing to bishop to d3 here. So going back to castles, queen takes queen is dreadful, so white should play knight to c3. But even so, a new novelty of knight to e5 is just beautiful for black, threatening to take on c4. So that's how we deal with the queen blocking, but if the knight blocks with knight d2, we can play something similar with knight to c6. The same moves in both variations, so you shouldn't forget this. If white plays d5 in this line, you can smirk and once again castle queenside, because pawn takes a piece means they're getting wiped out. For instance, rook h e8, bishop e2, and rook takes e6 looks menacing. With moves like knight e4 or doubling rooks coming soon to win your piece back. If they don't play d5 straight away and play knight to f3, then you can castle queenside, and if they play d5, sack a knight with knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, with an absolute megaton of death about to rain down upon white's position. When they played e4, they didn't expect to get obliterated off the board. They'll probably play bishop e2, but after bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop and rook e8, knight d4 is incoming, and now it's time to show them how to resign. After we recapture on e6, white may opt for the cowardly bishop to e2. Adding a sacrificial lamb in front of their king is probably one of the safest choices, but in a way they're just asking to get smashed off the board. We'll develop with knight to c6, and the most common move is knight to f3. We'll play bishop c5. We're not winning, but after both sides castle kingside, white will play d3. Now we activate our rook to e8, leaving white with multiple options. As I said in the previous video, you need to go through these variations yourself. I don't micromanage, but I will go through the useful moves. If bishop g5 here, let's kick that bishop away with h6, and once it moves, let's jump in with knight to d4. After a trade, our queen is placed very nicely, hitting the bishop and pawn at the same time, forcing bishop takes knight. Once we recapture, we're a pawn down, but hopefully even you can see black has a splendid position with the two bishops and a target on b2 and d3. Knight b d2 is also possible for white, although rather boring for them. We'll make it exciting with an awesome a5. If knight b3, drop your bishop to a7. Their eyes will be focused on pushing d4 here, but if they do this, we are winning. After a4, d5, pawn takes knight, queen takes queen, and rook takes queen. The smoke has cleared. We'll continue by capturing on c6 and leave white's position in ruins. Keep in mind the tactic here of bishop takes f2 if they take on b3. Finally, we get to our last move of this amazing gambit. If they play knight to f3, we have a rather tame line, so you really better brush up on your technique. Rest assured though, black is fine in these positions. We'll play a very sneaky queen to e7, threatening bishop takes c4 with a discovered check. Queen e2 is practically forced, but we'll develop normally with knight to c6. They should play d4, and we'll play bishop f5, forcing a queen trade. Black is a pawn down, but now we have our attention focused on jumping our knight into b4. If bishop e3, then we play knight b4, forcing them to play knight to a3 to cover c2, and we'll just castle. This line is not a quick win. There are two moves here. If pawn h3 plays c6, after bishop e2 bring a rook to e8, they'll castle, and now bring your other rook to d8. They'll bring a rook into the centre too, and just play bishop to d6. Black's plan is to play pawn h6, pawn to b6, and once you get these moves in, white will find it very hard to improve their position. Study this position with an engine and play some games to get a good feel for it. Bishop e2 is the alt move, but this allows us to play knight g4, and once they castle, take their bishop off the board. Once they recapture, black is actually in a better position after pawn g6. You have the two bishops, and hopefully even you can notice the weaknesses on the dark squares. Use the dark square bishop to torment white. My friends, this has been a study of the Icelandic Gambit. If your little brain can manage to retain this information, then you should well be on your way to crushing your opponent's e4 very soon. This has been Smarty Pants Chess. If you like the video, please do drop a like, comment or subscribe to improve your terrible chess skills and increase your elo. Goodbye.